The Senate Banking Committee hearing room fell dead silent as Kevin McCarthy leaned into his microphone, his voice cutting through the air like a knife. Representative Roumie, you talk about helping communities. But what have you actually done besides make noise on social media? The attack was swift, calculated, and designed to embarrass the first-term representative from California in front of millions watching C-SPAN. But what happened next would shock everyone in that room. Jonathan Roumie didn't flinch. He didn't look down. Instead, he smiled, the kind of smile that made opponents nervous. Because what McCarthy didn't know was that Roumie had been waiting for this exact moment. He had receipts, he had facts, and he was about to deliver a response that would leave the House Minority Leader completely speechless and trending on every social media platform within minutes. This wasn't just another political disagreement. This was about to become an epic takedown that would define both of their careers and show America exactly what happens when preparation meets opportunity. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss these amazing political moments. Seriously, you won't want to miss what happens next because this is about to get absolutely wild. Now let's see how Jonathan Roumie turned the tables on Kevin McCarthy in the most spectacular way possible. The stage was set for what would become one of the most talked about exchanges in recent political history. Kevin McCarthy, sitting confidently behind his nameplate, thought he had found an easy target in the first-term representative from California. But he was about to learn that underestimating Jonathan Roumie was the biggest mistake of his political career. The irony was thick in the air. Here was McCarthy, a man who had spent years positioning himself as the reasonable voice of conservative politics, about to get schooled by a man who had spent his career speaking truth to power. The contrast couldn't have been more perfect. The establishment politician versus the self-made public figure. The careful moderate versus the unapologetic progressive. The man who played it safe versus the actor-turned-politician who came to fight. The hearing had been routine until that moment. Discussions about banking regulations, committee business, the usual Washington back and forth. But tension had been building between McCarthy and Roumie for weeks over their different approaches to economic policy affecting working-class communities. McCarthy, as the highest-ranking Republican in the House, often clashed with progressive Democrats like Roumie over solutions to systemic issues. The backstory made this confrontation even more explosive. Just 2 weeks earlier, Roumie had called out McCarthy's voting record during an interview, noting that he had voted against every major piece of legislation that would have directly helped working-class families. McCarthy's team had been furious, issuing press releases and demanding retractions. But Roumie had doubled down, providing receipts for every claim he made. The tension had been simmering ever since, with both sides waiting for the right moment to settle the score. At just 42 years old, Jonathan Roumie had already made a name for himself as someone who didn't back down from a fight. He'd gone viral multiple times for his sharp questioning during committee hearings and his ability to break down complex issues in ways that regular people could understand. His background in acting and advocacy had taught him how to think quickly under pressure and how to dismantle weak arguments piece by piece. Roumie represented a district that was majority working class and diverse. He won his seat by promising to be an unapologetic advocate for the people he represented. He wasn't interested in compromise for the sake of compromise. And he especially wasn't interested in being lectured by Republicans about what was best for his community. What made him particularly dangerous to opponents was his combination of legal training, social media savvy, and genuine connection to the people he represented. Unlike many politicians who seemed disconnected from real struggles, Roumie had grown up in a working-class neighborhood and understood poverty, discrimination, and the challenges facing families firsthand. Roumie had a reputation for doing his homework. His staff was known for preparing extensive briefing books for every hearing, every meeting, and every appearance. He understood that as a newcomer in Congress, he would be held to a higher standard than his colleagues. So he made sure he was always the most prepared person in the room. This wasn't just professional pride. It was survival strategy in an institution that was still dominated by older, more experienced politicians, often looking for reasons to dismiss him. This confrontation represented much more than two politicians disagreeing. It was about competing visions for how working-class Americans should engage with the political system. Kevin McCarthy represented the conservative approach. Work within existing systems. Focus on personal responsibility. Don't rock the boat too much. Roumie represented the progressive approach. Challenge the system directly. Demand structural changes and never apologize for fighting hard. The hearing room was packed with staffers, lobbyists, and reporters who sensed that something big was about to happen. Social media was already buzzing with anticipation as clips from earlier in the hearing showed tension building between the two. For McCarthy, this was supposed to be an easy win. Attack the freshman Democrat, show his conservative credentials, maybe get some clips that would play well with his base. He had the advantage of experience, seniority, and the respect that came with being the House Minority Leader. For Roumie, this was about proving that the new generation of Democrats wouldn't be intimidated by Republican attacks. He'd been dealing with condescending attitudes from his colleagues since arriving in Congress, and he was tired of being underestimated. The national political implications were huge too. With Republicans trying to make inroads with working-class voters and Democrats working to energize their base, this exchange would be watched closely by political strategists on both sides. How these two leaders handled this moment could influence messaging and strategy for years to come. Adding another layer of complexity was the fact that both politicians were being watched by their respective parties for very different reasons. Republican leadership had been growing frustrated with McCarthy's inability to effectively counter progressive arguments about race and policy. His past presidential run had fizzled partly because he couldn't articulate a compelling conservative vision that resonated beyond traditional GOP voters. This hearing was seen as a chance for him to reassert his relevance. For Democrats, Roumie represented the future of the party, young, diverse, media-savvy, and unafraid to fight. Party leadership was curious to see how he would handle his first major confrontation with a senior Republican, especially one who shared his racial identity but held completely opposite political views. But neither McCarthy nor the packed hearing room was prepared for what Jonathan Roumie was about to unleash. "You know what, Representative Roumie?" McCarthy said, his voice taking on a lecturing tone that immediately put everyone on edge. "I've been listening to you talk about helping communities for months now, but I have to ask, what have you actually accomplished besides making noise on social media?" The question hit like a thunderbolt. Committee hearings rarely featured this kind of direct confrontation between members, especially across party lines. Staffers looked up from their phones. Reporters started typing frantically. The C-SPAN cameras caught every reaction in the room. McCarthy wasn't finished. He leaned back in his chair with the confidence of someone who thought he just delivered a devastating blow. "I mean, I've been in Congress for over a decade. I've passed real legislation that has helped real people. But all I see from you is tweets and TikToks and viral moments. Where's the substance?" The condescension in his voice was unmistakable. This wasn't just political disagreement. This was one colleague publicly questioning another's competence and seriousness. In the polite world of congressional committees, this was the equivalent of throwing a punch. McCarthy's tone carried all the dismissive energy of someone who believed his years in Washington automatically made him superior to the social media politicians sitting across from him. What McCarthy didn't realize was that he was falling into a trap that had caught many politicians before him, assuming that social media engagement meant a lack of substance. He was about to learn that Roumie's online presence wasn't a substitute for real work. It was an amplifier for it. Roumie's face remained perfectly calm, but anyone watching closely could see his jaw tighten slightly. He set down his pen deliberately and looked directly at McCarthy. The room fell completely silent, waiting for his response. But McCarthy wasn't done escalating. Apparently emboldened by what he saw as Roumie's silence, he decided to twist the knife deeper. "Senator McCarthy," interrupted the committee chairman, trying to restore order, but McCarthy waved him off. "No, I think this is important," McCarthy continued. "We have serious work to do here, and I'm tired of grandstanding. Representative Roumie, you represent a district with real problems: poverty, crime, education, challenges. Your constituents deserve better than someone who's more interested in going viral than doing the hard work of governance." Now he had crossed a line that veteran politicians knew better than to cross. Questioning someone's competence was one thing, but suggesting they didn't care about their own constituents was a direct attack on their character and fitness for office. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Republican staffers were frantically texting, sensing that their boss might have overplayed his hand. Democratic staffers were equally busy, some looking worried about how their member would respond to such a public attack. Social media was already exploding. The C-SPAN clip was being shared on Twitter faster than anyone could keep track. McCarthy and Roumie were trending within minutes as people tried to figure out what was happening and why a Republican leader was going after a Democrat so aggressively. Political influencers and commentators were frantically typing hot takes. Conservative accounts were celebrating what they saw as McCarthy finally taking the fight to progressives. Liberal accounts were already predicting that McCarthy had made a huge mistake by underestimating Roumie. The comment sections were filling up with fire emojis and popcorn gifs as people settled in to watch what was clearly going to be an epic political showdown. Roumie still hadn't responded, and his silence was becoming its own story. Some observers wondered if McCarthy had actually succeeded in rattling him. Others who knew Roumie better were waiting for the explosion they knew was coming. McCarthy, misreading Roumie's silence as victory, decided to go for what he thought would be the knockout punch. Look, Representative Roumie, I'm not trying to be mean here. I'm just saying that if you want to be taken seriously in this institution, you need to focus on results, not social media followers. Maybe you could learn something from those of us who have actually been doing this work for a while. The patronizing tone was now unmistakable. A senior Republican leader was publicly lecturing a freshman Democrat about how to do her job in front of cameras during an official congressional hearing. What McCarthy didn't realize was that he had just given Jonathan Roumie exactly what he needed to destroy him completely. Because while McCarthy was talking, Roumie had been quietly organizing his thoughts, pulling up information on his phone and preparing for a response that would make this exchange legendary. The irony was perfect. McCarthy had just accused Roumie of being all about social media and viral moments, while Roumie was using his phone to access the detailed policy research and constituent services data that would prove him completely wrong. Roumie's team had anticipated this exact type of attack and had prepared comprehensive talking points about his actual legislative accomplishments. This wasn't luck. It was preparation meeting opportunity in the most spectacular way possible. The committee chairman tried one more time to restore order. If we could please return to questioning the witnesses, but it was too late. Roumie was ready to speak, and when he did, everything was about to change. Jonathan Roumie finally leaned forward to his microphone, and when he spoke, his voice was steady, clear, and absolutely devastating. Well, Senator McCarthy, since you asked what I've accomplished, let me tell you exactly what this freshman representative has been doing while you've been busy being the Republican Party's token leader. The room gasped. In the polite world of congressional discourse, calling someone a token was like dropping a nuclear bomb. But Roumie was just getting started. The word choice was deliberate and devastating. By calling McCarthy a token, Roumie was directly challenging the foundation of his political identity and his role within the Republican Party. He was saying out loud what many Democrats had whispered privately for years, that McCarthy's primary value to Republicans wasn't his policy expertise or leadership ability, but simply his loyalty to party lines and willingness to provide cover for policies that hurt working-class communities. The accusation hung in the air like a thunderclap, and everyone in the room understood they had just witnessed a moment that would define both of their careers. First, let's talk about substance since you brought it up, Roumie said, his voice steady and commanding. In my first year in Congress, I've co-sponsored 47 pieces of legislation focused on economic justice, criminal justice reform, and healthcare access. That's more than you sponsored in your first 3 years in the House. But I guess you were too busy learning how to be a good Republican to actually help people. McCarthy's confident smirk was already starting to fade. This wasn't the response he expected from someone he thought he could easily intimidate. But let's get specific, Senator, since you seem confused about what real work looks like. Roumie pulled out his phone and started reading from it, a move that would have seemed unprofessional from anyone else, but somehow looked perfectly natural coming from him. Last month, my office helped 847 constituents with federal agency problems, Social Security, veterans benefits, immigration issues. How many constituents did your office help last month, Senator? Do you even know? The question hung in the air like a challenge. McCarthy opened his mouth to respond, but Roumie wasn't finished. Oh, and since you mentioned my district's challenges, poverty, crime, education, let me tell you what I've actually done about them, instead of just giving speeches about personal responsibility. What happened next was a masterclass in political destruction. Roumie began methodically listing specific accomplishments, each one delivered with surgical precision designed to show McCarthy's attacks for what they really were. Uninformed nonsense from someone who had stopped doing the actual work of representing people. I secured $3.2 million in federal funding for after-school programs in my district. I worked with local law enforcement to establish community policing initiatives that have reduced violent crime by 15% in 3 target neighborhoods. I helped pass legislation that increased Pell Grant funding, directly benefiting students at historically black colleges and universities. With each accomplishment, McCarthy looked smaller and smaller. He had attacked Roumie's competence, and Roumie was systematically proving that he knew more about effective governance than McCarthy did. But here's what really bothers me about your little speech, Senator McCarthy, Roumie continued, his voice now edged with a calm but powerful defiance. You sit there and lecture me about social media and going viral, but you seem to forget that social media is how many of my constituents get their information. When I post a TikTok explaining how to apply for federal student aid, that video gets seen by 100,000 young people who might not otherwise know about those resources. He paused for effect, letting that sink in. When I tweet about a town hall meeting, I get 3 times the attendance that traditional media announcements generate. When I go viral for asking tough questions in committee hearings, it's because I'm holding powerful people accountable in ways that actually reach the people who need to see it. The room was completely silent now. Every person present understood they were watching something special. Roumie's political takedown would be studied and replayed for years to come. But you know what really gets me, Senator? Roumie's voice dropped to almost a whisper, which somehow made his words more powerful. You have the nerve to question my commitment to my constituents when you've spent the last 5 years carrying water for a party that actively works against the interests of people who look like us. McCarthy tried to respond. Representative Roumie, I'm not finished. The steel in Roumie's voice cut him off immediately. You want to talk about accomplishments? Let's talk about your accomplishments. You've been in Congress for over a decade, and what do you have to show for it? You voted against expanding Medicaid, which would have provided health care to thousands of black families in your state. You voted against raising the minimum wage. You voted against student loan forgiveness. Each vote Roumie listed hit like a hammer blow. He was systematically dismantling McCarthy's credibility as someone who claimed to represent the interests of working-class families while consistently voting against policies that would help them. You stood on that debate stage during your presidential run and talked about being the candidate who could bring people together. But your voting record shows you've spent your entire career dividing people by choosing party loyalty over people's lives. McCarthy's face was red now, clearly frustrated and looking for a way to respond. But Roumie had complete control of the moment. And then you have the audacity to sit here and question my qualifications? Roumie's voice rose slightly, not in anger, but in the kind of righteous indignation that resonated with people who had been talked down to their entire lives. Senator, I was a criminal defense attorney for years before I came to Congress. I've spent my entire career fighting for people who the system tried to throw away. I've stood in courtrooms defending people's constitutional rights while you were voting to confirm judges who would take those rights away. The personal contrast was devastating. While McCarthy had climbed the political ladder by appealing to conservative voters, Roumie had spent his career actually fighting for justice in the trenches. So when you ask me what I've accomplished, here's what I've accomplished. I've never forgotten where I came from. I've never sold out my community for political gain. And I've never been so desperate for acceptance from people who don't respect me that I'd throw my own people under the bus. The final blow was delivered with such precision that several people in the room actually gasped. Roumie had just accused McCarthy in public, on camera, of selling out his own community for political advancement. McCarthy finally managed to speak, his voice shaky with anger and embarrassment. Representative Roumie, that is completely inappropriate. What's inappropriate, Senator? Roumie asked, his tone cutting and calm. Is a man in your position using Republican talking points to attack someone who's actually doing the work? What's inappropriate is you questioning my qualifications when you've never bothered to learn what I actually do. What's inappropriate is this entire performance you just put on. Roumie leaned back in his chair, having delivered a response so complete and devastating that McCarthy was left speechless. The room remained silent for several long seconds as everyone processed what they had just witnessed. The committee chairman, sensing that things had gone far beyond what was appropriate for a hearing, quickly called for a recess. But it was too late. The damage was done, and the video was already going viral. The immediate aftermath of Jonathan Roumie's takedown of Kevin McCarthy was unlike anything Washington had seen in years. Within minutes of the exchange, social media exploded with a force that surprised even seasoned political observers. The hashtag #Roumie destroys McCarthy was trending on Twitter within 15 minutes. The original C-SPAN clip was shared thousands of times in the first hour with political commentators, activists, and regular citizens all weighing in on what they had just witnessed. Progressive Twitter was absolutely on fire. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez tweeted, "This is what happens when you underestimate someone who actually does the work at Jonathan4US, just gave a masterclass in how to respond to bad faith attacks." The tweet got over 200,000 likes in 2 hours. The Shade Room posted a clip with the caption, "Auntie Jonathan said, not today." That went viral on Instagram, introducing Roumie's takedown to a whole new audience of young Black social media users who might not normally pay attention to congressional hearings. TikTok exploded with reaction videos. Young Black women especially embraced Roumie's response, with many creating videos breaking down exactly why his comeback was so effective. One TikTok user explained, "He didn't just defend himself, he exposed his whole game. That's how you handle someone trying to come for you." Conservative social media was notably quieter, with many Republican influencers simply pretending the exchange hadn't happened. Those who did comment mostly tried to criticize Roumie's tone rather than engage with the substance of his response, which only made it more obvious that he had won the exchange decisively. Within hours, every major news outlet was covering the story. CNN ran the full exchange with the headline, "Democratic Rep delivers blistering response to GOP leader's attack." MSNBC's Joy Reid dedicated an entire segment to the exchange, calling it a perfect example of how the new generation of Democratic leaders refuses to be intimidated. Even Fox News was forced to cover the story, though they focused primarily on whether Roumie's response was appropriate for a congressional hearing. But the fact that they covered it at all showed how big the story had become. The Washington Post published an analysis piece examining the broader implications of the exchange for Black political leadership. The New York Times ran a profile of Roumie, noting that he had emerged as a powerful voice for a new generation of progressive Democrats. Political podcasts couldn't get enough of the story. Pod Save America dedicated their entire episode to the exchange with hosts Jon Favreau and Dan Pfeiffer, calling it one of the most effective political responses they'd ever seen. Conservative podcasts mostly ignored the story entirely, which spoke volumes about how badly it had gone for McCarthy. McCarthy's team went into full damage control mode immediately after the hearing. His communications director issued a statement saying that the minority leader regretted that the discussion became personal and that he respected Representative Roumie's passion for his constituents, but the damage was already done. McCarthy appeared on Fox News the next evening, trying to reframe the exchange as an example of Democratic hostility and inability to have civil discourse. The interview was widely panned, with critics noting that McCarthy seemed defensive and unprepared for questions about his own voting record. Several conservative commentators who had initially supported McCarthy's attack began distancing themselves once they saw how thoroughly Roumie had dismantled his arguments. One prominent Republican strategist, speaking anonymously, told Politico, "Kevin stepped in it big time. You can't attack someone's qualifications if you haven't done your homework on what they have actually accomplished." McCarthy's presidential ambitions, which were already on life support after his failed 2024 campaign, were dealt another serious blow. Political insiders noted that the exchange had revealed McCarthy as someone who could be easily outmaneuvered by a first-term representative, raising questions about his effectiveness as a national leader. For Jonathan Roumie, the exchange was a career-defining moment that established him as a major figure in Democratic politics. His office reported that they received over 10,000 supportive emails in the 24 hours after the exchange, including dozens from fellow members of Congress. Nancy Pelosi tweeted her support. "Jonathan Roumie represents the best of the new generation of Democratic leaders, prepared, principled, and unafraid to speak truth to power." Fundraising emails featuring clips from the exchange raised over $500,000 for Democratic candidates in just 2 days. The Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee immediately began featuring Roumie in their promotional materials, recognizing that he had become a powerful draw for donors and volunteers. Speaking invitations poured in from across the country. Within a week, Roumie had been invited to speak at over 30 events, from college campuses to Democratic Party fundraisers. His team had to hire additional staff just to handle the media requests. The exchange between McCarthy and Roumie highlighted several broader trends in American politics that went far beyond just these two individuals. First, it demonstrated the growing confidence and skill of the new generation of progressive Democrats. Roumie's response showed that younger Democrats were no longer content to simply absorb Republican attacks. They were prepared to hit back hard and effectively. Second, it exposed the limitations of the Republican Party's strategy of elevating black conservatives like McCarthy as shields against charges of racism. When McCarthy attacked Roumie, he couldn't hide behind his identity. Roumie was equally black, equally qualified, and far better prepared for the exchange. Third, it showed how social media had changed political communication. Roumie's ability to use social media effectively wasn't a liability. As McCarthy had suggested, it was a superpower that allowed him to reach and mobilize people in ways that traditional politicians couldn't match. Political scientists immediately began analyzing the exchange as an example of how political discourse was evolving. Dr. Melanie Price, a professor at Prairie View A&M University, noted, "What we saw was a clash between old-school political tactics and new-school political communication." Jonathan Roumie understood that in the social media age, authenticity and preparation matter more than seniority and politeness. In the weeks following the exchange, several developments showed its lasting impact on both politicians' careers. Kevin McCarthy's influence within the Republican Party noticeably diminished. He was removed from several high-profile speaking engagements, and rumors circulated that party leadership was losing confidence in his ability to effectively communicate their message. His poll numbers in California, while still strong, showed their first significant decline in years. Jonathan Roumie, meanwhile, was elevated to several high-profile committee assignments and became a regular on political talk shows. Democratic leadership clearly recognized that he had proven himself as someone who could effectively defend the party and its values under pressure. The exchange also had implications for how political attacks were conducted. Several Republican strategists noted privately that the Roumie-McCarthy exchange had shown the risks of underestimating younger Democratic politicians, especially men of color, who had proven themselves in other arenas before coming to Congress. Beyond politics, the exchange became a cultural touchstone for discussions about respect, preparation, and standing up to bullies. It was shared widely in non-political spaces, with many people seeing it as an example of how to respond effectively when someone tries to diminish your accomplishments. Young black men especially embraced Roumie as a role model, with many citing his response as an example of how to handle workplace discrimination and condescension. The phrase, "I'm not finished," which Roumie used to cut off McCarthy's attempted interruption, became a popular meme and rallying cry. Educational institutions began using the exchange as a case study in effective communication and political strategy. Several law schools added it to their curricula as an example of how legal training could be effectively applied in political contexts. Looking back on the exchange months later, political observers agreed that it represented a significant moment in the evolution of American political discourse. Jonathan Roumie had shown that preparation, authenticity, and strategic thinking could overcome traditional advantages like seniority and institutional position. For Kevin McCarthy, the exchange served as a harsh reminder that political attacks could backfire spectacularly when poorly planned and executed. His attempt to diminish Roumie had instead elevated him while diminishing himself. But perhaps most importantly, the exchange showed that American politics was changing. The old rules about deference to seniority and polite discourse were giving way to a more direct, more authentic form of political communication that resonated with voters tired of political games and empty rhetoric. As one Democratic strategist put it, Jonathan Roumie didn't just win that exchange. He showed us what the future of Democratic politics looks like: prepared, passionate, and unafraid to fight back. The story of Kevin McCarthy's attack on Jonathan Roumie and his epic response will be remembered as a defining moment in modern American politics, a moment when preparation met opportunity and the underdog delivered a knockout punch that left his opponent speechless and the nation talking. If you enjoyed this incredible political showdown, make sure to like this video and subscribe to never miss these amazing moments. What did you think of Jonathan Roumie's response? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to share this with anyone who needs to see how to handle political bullies. Hit that notification bell so you're the first to know when we drop our next explosive political story. This story proves that in politics, preparation beats position every single time. When you come for someone, you better make sure you've done your homework first, because if you haven't, you might just get the education of a lifetime on live television. Jonathan Roumie didn't just defend himself that day. He showed the entire country what real political leadership looks like in the 21st century. The exchange also serves as a perfect reminder that in our social media age, every political moment can become a defining moment. One well-prepared response can change careers, shift narratives, and inspire millions of people who are tired of seeing bullies get away with their tactics. Sometimes, all it takes is one person willing to stand up and fight back with facts, preparation, and the courage to speak truth to power. Wow, what an epic showdown. Jonathan Roumie didn't just respond to Kevin McCarthy's attack. He completely dismantled it, showing us what real leadership in the 21st century looks like. If you were as blown away by this exchange as we were, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss these incredible political moments. What do you think of Jonathan Roumie's response? Let us know in the comments below. And if you know someone who needs to see how to handle political bullies, don't forget to share this video. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one with more explosive stories.